159-1214. May I have the appearances of counsel, please?
Good morning, Your Honor. For the state, Assistant Prosecutor Scott LaMountain.
Good morning. Jackie Blues on behalf of Mr. Santana, Judge, and if briefly I can just do Mr. Santana. Mr. Santana, we spoke this morning. You indicated that your family is in the process of hiring a private attorney, but that you are seeking the services of the public defender today for your detention hearing, and that you wish to proceed today. Is that correct?
Yes.
All
I'm
right,
ready
so
to proceed with the hearing.
thank you. And so with that, I will turn it over to the state to demonstrate probable cause.
Thank you, Judge. And I just want to make sure we're clear. Mr. Santana has two separate files. There is the murder file from February 27th, and then the following day, based on the same investigation, but somewhat of a different case, he has a charge of unlawful possession of a handgun, as well as CDS, second degree with intent, and paraphernalia with intent out of South Brunswick. And I was going to incorporate that into the probable cause, if that's okay.
All right, and Ms. Boulos, do you have the documentation on the additional case beyond the murder case?
Judge, there is not really any discovery on that particular matter. I'm aware of the warrant that was applied for. So if the state would like to process some information about it, I think it's not the case that's going to carry the day today, but I'm aware that there was a warrant sought, and I don't have anything relating to the actual recovery of items.
All right, I'll hear you, Mr. LaMountain.
All right, thank you, Judge. The state submits that on February 27th at approximately 1 a.m., New Brunswick police located a vehicle with multiple bullet holes that was stopped in the intersection of Remsen Avenue and Seaman Street in their city. Inside of the vehicle, patrol officers located a deceased individual with an apparent gunshot wound to the head. This individual was deceased. He was not breathing, and he's later identified with the initials of JM. Both the Middlesex County Prosecutor's Office Major Crimes Unit as well as New Brunswick Police Department detectives began an investigation as to trying to determine who had shot and killed this victim. One of the steps that they took was to collect multiple video surveillance video from multiple video surveillance cameras from the area. The video was able to capture the intersection of Remsen and Seaman, and throughout the evening, this defendant is captured on various cameras in the area, hanging out on the block. During one of the videos, the relevant video, a car pulls up to the intersection. This defendant and two other individuals are across the street, and there's a number of individuals gathered together, and one gentleman walking up who then approaches what is later learned to be the victim's car, and then you can see him diving for cover behind what appears to be a snowbank, while the other individuals on his side of the street duck as well. The video then captures three individuals walking away from the scene. Now, an audio and video recorded statement was obtained from one of the three individuals that was on the side of the street with this defendant, who indicated to officers that on that evening he had gone for a walk and that he ended up in the area where the shooting occurred. And when he got to that area, he recognized two individuals. One, an older gentleman who he had known for a while, and the second, a younger male who he referred to as Rowdy's brother. And Rowdy is someone who was recently murdered in the city of New Brunswick. This individual stated that he fist bumped both individuals and that they're standing there talking, that when some point a Mazda pulls up to the other side of the street, at which point the person who he identifies as Rowdy's brother, the younger of the two individuals, stated, "That's the guy who snitched on me." At this point, this witness realizes the person next to him, the younger gentleman, is 3 feet away, begins shooting into the car with what he believes is a 9mm handgun. He states, again, this being the witness, that he heard approximately 7 shots and that he was close enough to the gun that he actually felt the vibration. Subsequent investigation by New Brunswick and, well, I'll leave that part out for now, Judge. All three individuals on that side of the street depart the area. The witness indicated that as they walk off, the person who had fired the gun was walking next to him, so he broke off to distance himself from the situation, as he says. He eventually, this being the witness, eventually doubles back to the Mazda after the shooter departs the area to check on the occupant, and then he saw no movement. He believed that the victim had been shot in the head, and during his statement, he signs a picture taken from a still photo taken from one of the video cameras, and he signs it. indicates that that's who he believed to be Rowdy's brother and the person who was out on the block with him at the time of the shooting. This photo is actually of the defendant, Judge. Additionally, a female witness who was captured on the video camera, who was out on the block at the same time, she again gives a statement and says that somebody who she knows as Rowdy's brother, who was recently killed in New Brunswick, is out on the block. She signs a picture of this defendant and says that's the one. She knows him by the street name Killa, and she also indicates that Killa, this being Rowdy's brother, on him, and that his brother was recently murdered. New Brunswick Police and Middlesex County Prosecutor's Office Major Crimes are aware of the fact that Dawson Bay, aka Rowdy, is the best friend and who this defendant calls his brother, and that he was recently shot and killed in the city of New Brunswick. No one has been charged in that case. The following, police then made attempts to find this defendant, and the following day he is observed leaving a hotel room or leaving the hotel of La Mirage in South Brunswick and getting into a silver BMW X5. The defendant stopped. A subsequent search of the vehicle locates a handgun, a .380 handgun, which is not believed to be the murder weapon, and a subsequent search warrant executed of his hotel room at the La Mirage reveals second-degree weight crack cocaine, paraphernalia for distribution, as well as a fully loaded magazine. Again, this magazine is not believed to be the associated with the handgun involved in the killing, so that would be three separate guns we're looking for, Judge. Well, one we found and two we're looking to recover. Further review of the video surveillance follows this defendant as he leaves the scene up the block on the night of the murder, and eventually a silver BMW X5 is observed circling the block, and it pulls over for a brief period of time and then pulls off again. This occurs just a few blocks from where the shooting took place, and as I stated before, when this defendant was stopped the following day in South Brunswick, he was in fact driving that silver BMW X5. A statement is taken from this defendant where he indicates that he was in fact in the city of New Brunswick, although he doesn't admit to any involvement in the murder, and a subsequent statement of his girlfriend. She indicates that as far as she knows, her boyfriend was in New Brunswick the whole night, and that he does often carry a handgun with him. The state submits is that is sufficient probable cause to indicate that this defendant has committed the crimes that he is charged with.
Thank you. Ms. Bullos?
Thank you, Judge. I recognize that probable cause is an extremely low standard. So I'm just going to point out a few things that I think are relevant for the court's consideration as we go through the rest of this hearing. One being that there are multiple people that are out on the street on this particular day, and the detectives, in fact, take statements from, I think, at least 5 different individuals. Not a single one of those individuals actually indicates that Mr. Santanna is the shooter. The individual who indicates that signs a photo as Mr. Santanna being out there is asked specifically, is this individual one of the men that was out there that night on the block? And he says yes. But we already know from the numerous statements that we're taking from the other individuals that there were at least 5 to 6 people that were all on the block that particular night. So the only identification that is made is that he was also present. He does not particularly identify that photo as the shooter. There is also the surveillance, my understanding, is not necessarily clear as to the individual. The photo that is utilized as the identification of Mr. Santanna being in the area that day is not from that surveillance camera in particular, but from a different one, Judge. That being said, there are numerous statements here that do place him in New Brunswick as well as his own. But again, we know that there are a number of people in New Brunswick on that block, and nobody names him by name or points to him as the identity of the shooter. We also know from his girlfriend's statement, Judge, he indicates that he does carry a weapon, and that has already been come to fruition in the search that we know there's a weapon. But now we've also already learned that that is not the weapon that was utilized in this particular shooting. There's nothing in the girlfriend's statement where obviously she's coming with some candor to say, yes, I do know that he has a gun. At that point, she could have said, Judge, he's got 3 guns, but she doesn't say that. She says, I know that he has a weapon, and that weapon was recovered, and it was not the murder weapon. So that being said, Judge, I think that there are a couple of things here that when we talk about the weight of the evidence that do go in Mr. Santanna's favor. He is found with a gun. Everybody in this position now has already said that His brother had been murdered a few months ago. Nobody was charged. His girlfriend indicates he began carrying the gun after his brother was murdered. So that was a sort of a reactive behavior at that point in time. And the one weapon he had was not the murder weapon. So I think that there's enough here for us to have some questions about the identification of Mr. Santanna as the shooter in this particular case. And I'll reserve any further arguments for detention, Judge. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And certainly,
Briefly, I'm sorry.
Well-
I don't want to get too much into it unless you tell me I need to, but I do want to point out, counsel is correct about the statement that the witness that gave the tape statement indicates this person was on the block. But I also want to, and again, if Your Honor feels it's necessary, I will go into this deeper. But he's being asked to sign the picture of a person after this defendant allegedly just said that's the person that snitched on me and opened fire into a car, hitting him in the head with a bullet and killing him. So I can go into the whole nature of the snitching part if you need me to, but the state relies at this point on his probable cause.
well, I do think that there is sufficient information that has been presented by the state's proffer to establish probable cause. And certainly at the, if there ultimately is a trial before a petit jury in this matter, the state will have to prove by beyond a reasonable doubt to the jury that Mr. Santanna is identified as the person who fired the gun. I think there's sufficient information based upon the video surveillance that clearly puts him at the scene and in the area, as the statements of the multiple witnesses involved and his own girlfriend that are sufficient to establish probable cause. So I will now turn it over to Ms. Boulos. It is the defense burden to prove that there are conditions that will assure community safety and the other prongs that the court must look at. Because he is subject to life imprisonment, the burden shifts to the defense to establish that he should be released. Ms. Boulos?
Yes, Judge, that's correct. Thank you. Just to tell the court a little bit about Mr. Santanna, he does have stable residence and ties to the community. He would be residing with his mother in Boundbrook. He does not have any children, as the court can see from his PSA. He is quite young himself. He was employed prior to his incarceration on this matter, Judge, but he was employed at McDonald's in East Brunswick. I don't know if he'll still have that job given the amount of time that he's already missed, Judge, but that does indicate to us that he's someone who is employable at a very minimum, and he did have that stable employment prior to this. He's been in New Jersey his entire life. Again, indicating his community ties and his stability in this community. I'd also, again, just point out, Judge, that regardless of the finding of probable cause, when we talk about the weight of the evidence, is very circumstantial at this particular time, and I think the state will have an uphill battle when it comes to identification of Mr. Santanna in this case. If you take a look at his PSA, you will see, obviously, that there is a no release recommended given the nature of the offense. However, he has a very limited criminal history. And I think what's most poignant about his criminal history, Judge, is that there's nothing in kind of what we're dealing with here today. He has no prior violence, no aggravated assault, and in fact, Judge, he has no prior indictable convictions whatsoever. At this point in time, he only has pending charges that he is not even on pretrial release for. So we're talking about a young individual who obviously, first of all, gets a bump up given his age. So he does get a bump on his numbers, given that he's under the age of 22, but he also has these matters that are pending, all nonviolent, not on any form of community supervision. So I'm asking the court to consider a high level of community supervision at this time, which would include electronic monitoring. Again, his home and his residence is not even in Middlesex County. So if the court were to put him on EM at his home in Boundbrook, and he'd be barred from even entering Middlesex County or New Brunswick, but for court, I think that that would be sufficient given his lack of prior history with anything in kind of this type of offense. Thank you, Judge.
Thank you. Mr. LaMountain?
Judge, based on the statements of both this defendant and his girlfriend, he's not welcome at his home, and he was out on the street corner slinging dope in order to pay for his rooms at the La Mirage Hotel. Also in Mr. Santana's statement, he indicated that he hadn't gone and worked a shift at McDonald's in some time and was looking for something better. So I don't think he has anywhere to go, and I don't think he has a job to go to except back to the streets to sell more crack cocaine. Also, Judge, and I think this is probably one of the scariest things, is he says right before he opens fire on his car, that's the guy who snitched on me. And Your Honor has just heard that multiple people have now given statements against him in this case. So I can't think of anyone who needs to be locked up more to ensure the safety of people in this community, specifically the people who have given taped statements to law enforcement when he just murdered the last person who gave the taped statement or cooperated with law enforcement against him. So I believe that I can't think of anyone who needs to be detained more, Judge, based on the fact that he's selling drugs, possessing multiple weapons, and killed another human being. And I don't think there's any conditions that anyone could come up with to ensure the safety of the people who have now given statements to law enforcement.
Thank you. This matter comes before the court on the state's motion to detain Mr. Santanna, and I've already made findings regarding probable cause, and certainly it is under the nature of the charge here, it is the defense burden to prove that there are conditions that will assure community safety and that he will not obstruct the process. The public safety assessment recommends that he not be released because he's subject to life imprisonment, which is why the burden shifts. And he scores a 4 in each of the risk scales for failure to appear and the risk of criminal activity. And there is a new violent criminal activity flag that is raised. As noted by Ms. Boulos, he does not have an adult criminal record, but he does have multiple charges pending, which I can't tell whether they were all charged on summonses, but he was not on any type of pretrial monitoring at the time of this incident. Despite the lack of an adult criminal record, I would also note that he is only 20 years of age, so he's only been an adult for a relatively short period of time, and he does have a juvenile record. And his juvenile record includes receiving stolen property, adjudication, as well as a violation of probation, actually 2 violations of probation when he was a juvenile. The ties that this defendant has to the community are extremely questionable, although Ms. Boulos mentioned that he has a mother and stepdad and other family members that he could live with. I question then, why was he at a motel when he was surveilled and watched by the police? And I think I know the answer to that question based upon what was found in that motel room, namely the crack cocaine. There's also some questionable, the job that he has at McDonald's. It would be great if he had a job there or anywhere, but by his own statement, according to Mr. LaMountain, he hadn't been there in some time. The strength of the state's case, before I get to the strength, the serious nature of the case doesn't get much more serious than a first-degree murder, where the defendant is now subject to 30 years to life imprisonment if he is found guilty by a jury. With regard to the strength of the state's case, certainly there is a strong case with regard to the physical evidence that was found in the motel room. And with regard to the murder, there is video surveillance, and there are multiple statements from multiple witnesses that do identify this defendant as the culprit, as the person who killed the victim in this matter. And as noted by Ms. Boulos, there's evidence may be circumstantial in part, but as we know from the standard jury instructions, sometimes certain circumstantial evidence can be more persuasive and satisfying than not. Very often, I know the state is in a position of having to prove a case by connecting the dots, by putting together pieces of a puzzle. And here there are multiple video surveillance tapes, as well as the statements of the multiple witnesses that will be put together, I presume, when the state ultimately presents its case to a jury. So based upon the strength of the state's case, the serious nature of this case in this matter, and the public safety assessment, the questionable ties that this defendant has with the community, I am going to detain you, Mr. Santanna, and you have 7 days to file an appeal of this decision. This hearing is complete. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge.
And by the way, this is based upon the 2 grounds of obstruction and of danger to the community. Thank you.